Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Wildcast. My name's Calvin Coyles, of course, and I'm very excited to be joined by the incredible Mac Ling over in Hong Kong. We had already a fantastic conversation, and in fact, I'm going to see if I can try and incorporate some of that bit into the show notes, and of course, as part of the recording as well. Mac is a transformational leader, a coach, a consultant, an American that's living in Hong Kong. He's got a beautiful family as well, a 2-year-old and a 6-month-old as well. And we're going to talk today about coaching and consulting and how we built that business, but also about radical authenticity. It's something that we hear a lot about today, but no one really has been able to distill it down into a series of steps or core guiding principles for a lot of people, particularly in a workforce that's ever changing. So we're going to have that conversation and understand what it means to talk about that. I'd be really interested to get your take as well, Mac, on some of the dialogues that we're having around masculinity as well. I think that's a really interesting conversation to have. And then also the importance of transition. Globally, we're in transitions at the moment. Culturally, there are transitions happening, but then also there are transitions in our workplace. I was speaking to somebody just yesterday from the States who was talking about this. They're referring to it in the States as the Great Resignation, where people are resigning from jobs because they've gone, hey, I can live a different life. So how do you manage that transition and how do you put in place the building blocks to achieve success? So Mac, welcome to the podcast. It's an honor to have you with us. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Calvin, for having me. I'm very excited to be here, and yeah, that was such an amazing introduction. So let's do this conversation.
Excellent. Well, look, give us a bit of a backstory. How did you happen to end up being an American living in Hong Kong? You got your family, and now you're doing consulting to some of the biggest companies in the world throughout sort of Asia Pacific. What did that journey look like? How did you get into that? Is that something that you've always wanted to do, or is it something that you sort of fell into over the years? Give us the backstory.
Yeah. Thank you. So I think the long story short is I definitely fell into it. I had a 15-ish year career in the US, started in technology, got an MBA, and then moved into product management in a technology company. And, did that for a while, and I was like, I don't know if this is really what I want. And actually an opportunity opened up with my family's business, and I moved to Asia, into Hong Kong in 2012 to run sales and marketing for a payroll outsourcing company. And so I did that for a while and started to realize that, wow, culturally, I'm so different than the people who work for me. And my style of leadership is so different because I've been trained as a Westerner.
Yeah.
And it just really turned out to be a bad cultural fit.
Right.
So I ended up leaving the family business after a year, which was we could talk about if you want to. And then from there, I did a few entrepreneurial things. I moved to Thailand for a couple of years, and that's where I was running an NGO, really training small NGOs in how to run better charities. So,
Okay.
helping them with vision, mission, values. Like how do you raise money? How do you,
Yeah.
I don't know, look at accounting? I mean, all
Right.
these kinds of basic blocking and tackling things. And I ran into a coach in my network, and he said, "Hey, I'll train your leaders in this transformational coaching process. Just pay for my flight to Bangkok and put me up in a nice hotel." I'm like, "Okay."
Yeah. Great
Um,
deal.
and that, and the rest is really history. I got to take that course, and I really found it to resonate with who I am, the gifts that I have, and it really brought out really the best parts of me. And
Right.
I figured, wow, I could create value for people just being me.
Yeah.
And so from that, I moved back to Hong Kong in 2015, and I've been here ever since, running this coaching business.
Wow, that's amazing. And so talk to us about, you made a point there around you've been trained as a Westerner effectively, and then you come back and you're trying to manage a family business, which obviously, regardless of where that's located, it's always going to be a different dynamic anyway than big corporate. And certainly they don't teach that in an MBA. So talk to me about what you felt was the real differences there from a cultural perspective. I know it's really the sort of X factor that you present now to your teams that you coach and consult, obviously that hybrid. But what was the sort of friction points that were in the road back then?
I think, if I were to sort of distill it down, I think there's a big question around trust, and the relationship with trust between leaders and teams is just vastly different. I mean, I would even say at the opposite ends of the spectrum,
Right.
where in the West, we're taught to trust your people, or that's sort of the basis is you give them some trust and then you let them go do some things, and you want to empower your people, give them some freedom to make some mistakes, and you know and
Yeah.
they'll learn
Yeah.
is the idea. uh, in the East and in more Asian businesses, It is more of the idea that, hey, the person at the top has been doing this probably longer than you. And so we're going to tell you some things and we're going to show you how to do things in a very specific way. And your job is to do those things. And don't tell me if you think it's wrong because you probably don't have as much experience as I do. So just do what I ask and
Yeah.
we'll like have a successful company.
Everyone will be happy if you just follow the
Everyone
rules.
will be happy, right? And
Yeah.
we'll make a lot of money. And so you can start to see, because I came in with this trust your employees, mentality. I mean, so much of it started with like very simple things. Like, I don't really believe that you need to be sitting at your desk to do your work. Like, if you want to go and come in at 10 a.m. and leave at 6, but all of your work is completed in a very like highly like efficient manner, great, right? Whereas in like a Hong Kong culture, it's like, well, I need to be there before the boss shows up, and I can't leave until he leaves.
Mm.
So I'm like, what are you doing there? He's like, and I see people playing phones or like games on their phone, and I'm like,
It's
why are you
status
playing
signaling,
Candy
right?
Crush? And they're
Yeah.
like, well, because I'm showing face, and I'm like giving you
Yes.
the face to know that I'm sitting here
Yeah.
with you. I'm like, oh, so it's small things like that, how it shows up, all the way to giving feedback to your manager, right? Like, tell me what's wrong with the business. And usually those meetings were very quiet.
Yeah.
And I like was doing a lot of work to be like, you need to tell me or I can't help you fix the problems.
Mm.
And so that really started to shift how my team was working, and then that started to permeate throughout the country or throughout the like company culture.
Yeah.
And then the head of HR was like, what are you doing to my
Yeah.
company?
Yeah. Yeah. Look, it's a really interesting dynamic difference. When I was starting in speaking, I originally was living in Indonesia, working for my mentor at the time, and we did a lot of work in Singapore and also in Malaysia, and then he later did some stuff in Vietnam. But I always remember my first experience, and we had a Singaporean promoter that was there that was sort of helping us sort of tailor our presentation that was American, Australian, and UK based to a sort of Eastern audience. And I remember my first ever exposure in Australia, you ask an audience that just getting started at an event, hey, who's here because they're wanting to learn more about wealth creation? Put your hands up, right? Everyone put their hand up, right? Or who's here because they wanted to achieve more success in life? Everyone put their hand up. So there I am in Singapore, got 500 people in this stadium. I'm like, hey, who's here because they want to create more wealth in their lives? Put your hand up. And nobody's hand goes up, right? It's like fucking crickets. I'm like, what's going on? I'm like, oh, maybe I just asked the wrong question, right? So I'll slow it down. Who's here because they want to achieve more success in life by show of hands? So no one there. And I'm like, what's going on? Speak to the promoter. It's like, hey, most of the audience is Asian males. It's like, we're not acknowledging that I'm not already successful. I've got to show face. I was like, wow, that's a whole nother world. And it was a really different style. Like in Australia, you can get away with in a seminar environment being a lot more affiliative, like a lot more soft, and people will naturally step up. We found that really a much harder approach, a much more directive approach worked really well in those markets. So it's just really interesting. You can see if that's how people are like when they're in their own free time, imagine what it's like in a workplace environment, right? It's just a massive difference. I remember listening to reading Jack Welch's book, Winning. And he talked about how, the differences in the mindset of employees. In America, everyone goes home for dinner with their families at 5 or 4. And he says in Hong Kong, in the GE offices, he says he would hear stories of moms that would finish work at 5, go home, feed and bathe their children, then come back into the office from 8 until midnight, and then come back to the office at 6 in the morning. And it was just like, there was just a different expectation in that culture. And I was like, wow, that's such a different life, just simply because of the social norms that you have that are part of that. And we were even talking just before, Mac, about how that's ingrained in children as well, in Hong Kong and Singapore specifically as well. Makes a big difference, right?
Absolutely. And you look at the education systems, and I think, it breeds, I don't know, it breeds a really like impressive work ethic.
Yes.
And
yes.
And I think where I have some challenges with it is that I think some of that work ethic is rooted in a fear. It's in a very scarcity mindset where it's like, well,
absolutely,
I have to do this,
absolutely,
else I'm going to lose my job. As opposed to more abundance where you're like, well, I'm doing this because I enjoy it, or I'm doing it because I found the energy that drives me to do other things. And so I think that's, you can find success in both paths. I think it's just, how sustainable, how enjoyable do you want it to be?
It's the dynamic, which is actually quite an Eastern thing when you think about it, of success or fulfillment, right? Like most people, you would go, hey, I went to the East, to India or to Asia to meditate, to get away from the hustle of New York. But yet there are these New York centers. We talk about how Hong Kong is like a New York in Asia. And you have that same mentality, particularly in Singapore and Hong Kong, right? They're the sort of meccas of that. It is really interesting, just from a cultural dynamic. How much do you think of that is just this is the way it's always been, as opposed to looking at things pragmatically and going, well, there's no point doing effectively that which should not be done at all. So, how much are we just continuing the status quo as opposed to being, applying sort of first order principles to the challenges that we've got today in terms of our workforce?
That's a great question. And I think it's a little bit, I mean, I'll hedge, and I think we have a lot of both
Yeah,
going on.
yeah,
Because it is easier to just carry on the track that we know. And
yeah,
so when we are stressed, when we need to put on the autopilot, that is going to be the easiest way,
yeah,
right? And so then to buck the trend and to say, I'd like to take a step back and look at what we're doing. Let's look at like reasons, purpose. Is this the best way? That's not always met with, welcome faces. It can
yeah,
be very disheartening because people are like, whoa, 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 like the train's moving. It's not
yeah,
that broken.
yeah, yeah,
So let's just
yeah,
keep doing what we're doing. And I think that can be a real struggle to actually creating progress.
yeah,
But yeah, that's a great
yeah.
question.
Now, talk to me a little bit about, and I was going to come to the transition part of our conversation later, but I'm inspired to talk about it now, so and we can potentially loop back anyway. In the West, particularly, there's been a lot more freedom, like what I would refer to as not location freedom, but rather that's permeated in quite a lot of companies, right? Flexible working hours, people have the ability to sort of share roles. I don't imagine that's as prevalent in centers like Hong Kong and Singapore, for example, or in Asia Pacific, where I know you work very broadly. So the impact that COVID has, where now everyone's forced to go into lockdown and work from home, personally, I much rather work from home in Perth or in Thailand than I would in Hong Kong or New York, because just the size of people's homes is completely different. A lot of places, particularly in places like Tokyo, for example, not even kitchens, right? Because people don't even cook; they just eat out. So, talk to me about the impact that COVID's had on workplace dynamics, working from home. Has have you had the lockdowns in Hong Kong like you have had in the rest of the world? And what have you seen that's had an impact? Because that was a far less flexible working environment before. And so, in some companies, it's like, well, hey, we have not had a change because everyone could work from home anyway. There's other companies like everything that we had is broken now, and now we're really trying to pick up the pieces again. So, have you found that transition in those environments that you work and consult to?
Absolutely. And I work for a number of financial services clients who, as you probably know, have huge, grade A, beautiful office buildings here in Hong Kong.
Yeah,
And one of the challenges, as you mentioned, is that home space is very small. So even, 12 months ago, when we were, doing everything on Zoom, facilitating, running coaching sessions online, there was all of this rhetoric that it's like, well, hey, like I don't have a place to do this, so I'm sitting at my kitchen table and my children are right next to me. And so I don't know how to create space for
yeah,
my work life at home. So there was a lot of pain moving into that place of you have to work from home. People are shipping out monitors, shipping out laptops and
yeah,
chairs and people are like, we have nowhere to put this equipment. So what am I supposed to do with this?
yeah,
Um, so I think as we are coming back on this side, Hong Kong is it's pretty free while you're here. We can't leave very freely because of our quarantine requirement. Um, but I would say most people are welcoming going back to the office.
yeah,
And I know with a couple of like some companies are on split shifts, so like you're in for a week, you're at home for a week. Some are like fully back in the office. So we're definitely seeing more and more of that happen. I was at a co-working space yesterday, and
yeah,
it was full. So people are back, and we just like you said, we need the space, and so I think that
yeah,
gives a very different thinking around, work from anywhere, work from everywhere, it's not as attractive as, let's say it would be in Australia.
Yeah, sure. Amazing work. What do you see today as with the work that you're doing with clients, the big multinational organizations, obviously tiered, companies with lots of levels, and there's a nature which is people and numbers on a spreadsheet, not necessarily for the clients you work with, but that's more the rhetoric that we get. How does that sort of juxtapose against this sort of radical authenticity message that you have? I guess that's probably one of the reasons why you're so successful in what you do with companies. But talk to me about where that comes from, and is that really birthed out of that same concept, and how you came to be sort of talking about this and communicating about this more broadly?
Yeah. So I would say the radical authenticity concept was really it was a summary of weird, like similar conversations I was having over the last couple of years with clients. And I would sit
Okay.
with clients and we are talking about everything from like time management to trust to like, figuring out like what I'm gonna do as a new VP. And I'm sitting there having the same conversation, telling the same stories, asking the same questions. So I was like, why is this happening?
Yeah.
Uh, and what really started to occur to me is that it feels like we have some very similar issues with people in the corporate world today. And I think one of those basic foundational challenges is that I feel like we really lack some self-belief, and we lack our own way to generate self-belief.
Yeah.
And there's so much need for external validation. So I'm like relying on my manager to tell me, oh, like keep up the good work, or like my day is shot when somebody says this work sucks, go back and do it again. And what I started to realize is that if we don't understand who we are, and we just, sort of modeling ourselves after these other, idols in our world, it becomes really, really hard to then stand up and then become a leader and then set yourself apart from all the other leaders that are out there today.
Yeah.
So that authenticity piece came in where it was like, well, people, you read the blogs and, listicles and different things, and you're like, just be more authentic. And you're like, what does that mean? Like, I am me. Like, what do you want me to do? And how do I find out who I am? And then
Yeah.
what does that mean? And so the radical authenticity work came out of, okay, let me think about how I'm seeing people go into this. And then what's the big hurdle that we have to get through? And so I break it down into three steps, which we can talk a little bit
Yeah.
more in depth with. But the simple three steps are: number one, you have to know yourself.
Yeah.
And so you have to find ways to start understanding who you are, your likes, your dislikes, your strengths or weaknesses,
Yeah.
and really start to like sit in that and at least have an inventory of who you are. Number two goes to how can we start to accept the good, the bad, the weird, and the ugly of ourselves?
Yeah.
Easy to accept the good. And we just sort of like brush the like bad, weird, and ugly underneath the carpet. And we're like, we try to suppress it and hide it from others because we feel like the world might not, I don't know, accept it or want it.
Yeah.
And I think what I've found is that actually, when we start to do like personal branding work or thinking about you as a different leader, we always ask, well, what's your unique selling proposition? And if everybody has the same six unique selling propositions, I'm good with people, I know how to get stuff done, I'm, like, I'm a great networker. You're like, well, then you're actually not very different.
Yeah.
And so where the differences come in are in that bad, weird, and ugly.
Mm.
And if we can't start to accept those for ourselves, like my weird thing is like when I listen to music, it's really hard for me to process lyrics and the music at the same time. So I listen to instrumental music or electronic music only because my brain can't process two streams of information at the same time.
Wow.
And so what that means for me is that weirdness translates into, oh, I'm very singularly focused. So when I sit with a client, I'm very dialed into the words, like actually have not a lot of, brain clutter. So I can sit and be very present with you and just
Mm.
listen to the content of your words. And so that sets me apart from all the other coaches who are like fighting, brain chatter when they're listening
Yeah.
to their clients.
Yeah.
But I didn't know how to talk about that. And so it was just something weird where my wife laughs at me. She's like, why don't you what, you just blah, blah, blah the lyrics. I'm like, yeah, because I don't really know the lyrics. And I've been listening to these songs for 20 years. And so, and so when you start to understand, hey, these are some funny things about how my brain works. And actually, this maybe gives me a differentiation or a competitive advantage over the other
Yeah.
people in this space.
Yeah.
And I think finally, the parts of once you can come to some acceptance of these things, the good, bad, weird, and ugly, then we can start to think about, wow, when I integrate all of these things, I have something very unique to share with the world.
Mhm.
And then I can stand and not need to imitate anybody else. And I can just be and really sell myself on my individuality. And I think as I was listening to some of your other episodes, if you are an entrepreneur or somebody in a consulting or freelance business, we need to know what your unique contribution to my project is.
Mm.
And if you can articulate that, then actually your buyer or your client is going to be like, wow, like, yes, we need nobody else. And you are the only person that could do what we are looking for.
Yeah. 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 Excellent. And the third one is to integrate. Is that the 3 steps? So know yourself, accept who you are, and then integrate. Yeah.
Integrate and share your unique gifts. Yeah.
Great. Fantastic. I love that. And it's a very simple framework, right? But I think it obviously builds from there as well. What would be some of the 80-20 principles, if you will, within each of those sections for somebody that's working at home? And of course, I'd go to Source and for everyone listening, book in, have a conversation and do some work as well with Mac, because he does big corporate work, but he also does individual work as well. Let's start with the know thyself bit, right? Or to know who you are effectively. There's a million personality profiling tests out there. Of course, we can do that. And then there's obviously we have different stages and phases of our life, right? And some of those things we sort of tap into, and some of them we sort of try to reject or run away from. What's your sort of go-to tools for a coaching client that you're working with to help them create a better level of self-awareness?
Yeah, and I think this is the easiest one. This is the most fun one, right? So I think like personality tests are fantastic. If you can find ones that are less skill focused, those are probably better. So I really prefer the Enneagram because it helps to look at your motivations for doing things. And then journaling is really great. So if you can start to get the stuff out in your head out onto paper, journaling, amazing. And talking to a friend. Hey, like, you've known me for 10 years, 15 years. Like, tell me what my strengths are. Like, what do you see as like my, how am I different from the world? And how do I show up differently than everybody else? So that's like that's the easiest part, and very enjoyable, I would say.
Yeah. That friendship one is a really important one. I remember when I was 19, I was at university. I was doing a lot of charity work and speaking and that sort of stuff. And I'd sort of penciled myself into a corner at uni where I was very well known for a couple of key things. And that in some ways that was nice, but it's also quite nice to transition out of that, right? To feel, particularly when you're younger, and I think this is relevant for us at all times in our life, to sort of be able to sort of shed that skin and to be experienced of it as a new. And so I didn't really know what was going to be the next step for me. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I know a lot of pressure at 19. So I decided, okay, cool, I'm going to go to India. I'm going to go to India by myself, one-way ticket, and I ended up staying for a month backpacking around before my 20th year when I was at uni. And one of the things that fascinated me at that time, Mac, was this idea of, well, there's a Calvin Coyles in Perth, Western Australia, who does this non-for-profit work, that does this business stuff, that does this speaking stuff, and he's got a brand effectively that's a collection in my mind of all the things that I am. But I was really fascinated by this idea of, if I went to India and no one knew who I was, then who would I be? Yeah. Like if I'm being experienced as a new person. And so that was actually something that I did when I would meet people on the road, and I would have, whether that be a brief moment with them or a couple of days that we just happened to be in the same place and we would sort of bump into each other, I'd make an effort to ask, hey, if you could describe me in 3 words, what would be the 3 things that you would pick? Don't sugarcoat it, just answer authentically in any way that you can. And obviously it was really different than what I had in my 3 words, because it was sort of this idea of, this is who Calvin is, but that actually wasn't who Calvin was. Calvin was completely different to that. And it was a beautiful moment of grounding, just to go, actually, even when no one knows you, those initial experiences of what people get from you can endure. And was fantastic to see that actually the very similar words across all the people that I met in India over those over that month, I think that's a really wise thing to look at that friendship group and to be able to ask them and to be open to getting maybe some different words than you expect, but are actually probably more authentically who you actually really are as opposed to who you're trying to be.
Yeah, that's a beautiful exercise, and I'm curious, was it very different than what the Perth Calvin person was, and like were those words, that
Yeah,
collection of words, different? Yeah.
sort of yes and no. So they were effectively the true essence of what I wanted to be, right? So my version back then, 19, was I wanted people to say that I was passionate, that I was inspiring, and that I was successful. I think that was the sort of thing that I was working towards. And then I think the words, and I'm not 100% sure I get them all right, but the words were kind, passionate, and generous. And I was like, well, I just remember the penny dropped for me when I heard that a couple of times. And I was like, well, when I'm being generous, I am being inspiring, because that in itself is inspirational. And passion was self-evident as well. But sorry, when I was being generous, I was success. I was doing things that were successful because I had to have that in order to give that or share that. And then there was a sense of inspiration that can come through just being kind to people, right? And making that impact. And I think if I had to pick, it's like when you have the choice of two things, when you have to pick which one you prefer, would I prefer to be inspiring or kind? Well, kind is nice. It's like, it's nice to be inspiring, but there's a lot of people that are inspiring that are dicks. So it is nice to know that, hey, if you come back to that, and that was probably more of what felt like I don't have to try to be these things. I just am these things. And the trying to be inspirational and trying to be successful, that was more of a stretch, which is nice as well. But it's not like, oh, hey, Calvin, if you just show up who you are, well, I'm passionate, absolutely, I'm generous, I'm kind. Like they're just they take no effort. And so in terms of creating this brand, I see a lot of people create a brand for themselves in a corporate environment that is this sort of mask they've got to try and live up to. Nothing wrong with that, but it's also nice just to be radically accepting of who you are, and then just go, I don't have to try and be something else. Who I am is all of those imperfections make me rather unique, which I think is coming back to your point just with the example of the music.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what's beautiful about what you just shared is that like kind and generous are really character traits. Those are what make you you. Whereas inspirational, successful are these sort of results
Yeah.
of exhibiting those strong character attributes,
Yeah.
and I think that's what, I really love how that showed up for you. And then you're like, oh, actually, yeah, like
Yeah.
I can try and be as inspiring, but how that is going to happen could happen in 7 different ways.
Oh,
Or
100%, 100%.
50 different ways.
Yeah. Talk to me about the acceptance piece. So, like, I've got clarity on who I am. I'm aware of the good, the bad, the weird, and the ugly. What's the process I go then through to have a higher level of acceptance on those things? Is there a sense in your work, Mac, from a transformational perspective, that it is valuable to work on our weaknesses and on the uglinesses of, I guess, on our character, and try to sort of smooth out those kinks? Or is it better to practice sort of radical acceptance and go, this is who I am, and I'm going to accept who I am rather than trying to change that? Like, at what point are we a work in progress, and what part should we just accept who we are and just go, well, this is who I am, so deal with it type concept?
Yeah, I love those questions. And so I'll start quickly with what do you do, right? So now I have this understanding of who I am. And I think the easiest way to do it, and I use just like an A4 sheet of paper, cut it into 4 quadrants, good, bad, weird, and ugly, and just start writing. And if we can start to look at a piece of paper and be like, oh, like I actually have to write down that I have a terrible anger problem, and I lose my shit whenever blah, 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 anything happens. Or I'm like very selfish when I get hungry, right? So when you start to put these things down on paper,
Yeah.
there's going to be a fair amount of cringe factor, so do this on your own. You don't have to share this with anybody else. And part of the question that you ask really is, okay, well, what am I willing to accept? Right? Which parts of this paper can I come to say, you know what? I accept these and I understand that they are me. And this is where the self-belief comes from. And I love myself for all of these things, rather than like, well, I only love these 4 components and this part can suck, can just like go hang out in the corner. So really what we're trying to do is I'm asking for clients to look at this sheet of paper and be like, okay, yes, it's not that you're not going to work on those things, but can we first just come to an acceptance that like, yeah, when I get hungry, I get really selfish. And can I then share that with my partner, with my like, kids, with my coworkers and be like, hey, like, I'd like you to know that I come to some terms and I realize that I get really angry and selfish when I get hungry. So if you see me getting like that, please offer me a cookie,
Yeah.
because if we don't talk about it, then people will just be like, I don't know, Mac, he gets really weird like at 3 p.m. every day. And I haven't come to any terms of acceptance about it. So I just kind of go on unaware of this thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that acceptance is really crucial. And then part of it is, okay, well, and this is where coaching can help. It's like, well, am I ready to like make some steps into maybe not being like this?
Mhm.
And can I envision who I'd like to be? So this gets into more of a coaching process, but
Yeah.
we can talk about that in a separate form. I really, this question of do we focus on our strengths or focus on our weaknesses, I think is an interesting one, because I think, and you may have heard this before, right? Our strengths magnified can become our or are usually our weaknesses, and so on so many of these equations, it is just finding some balance in how we show up to the world. And so my ambitiousness at its worst is terrible, and I become ego driven. I'm just like knocking people out of the way to get what I want. But my ambitiousness at a healthy place where I'm giving to the world is probably a nice thing for the world to have.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
think so much of it is starting to think about, okay, well, if I start to see some patterns, I can look at these and be like, oh, this is actually on the same line. And then where is it that maybe I need to dial back or at least have some awareness that like, yeah, when this gets out of control, like it's out of control, right? So and what can I do to bring it back a few
Yeah.
notches?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that makes sense. I like that. I think that communication, we talk about this all the time in our work, that awareness precedes change. So you've got to be aware of something in order to make that change. But then that doesn't obviously create the change. You've got to then do the work on that to be able to make that happen. And I think communication is great, particularly because it allows people to be a mirror. So even if someone doesn't give you a cookie, they go, hey, Mac, you hungry? It's like, oh, okay, cool. Now I'm more aware of that. I can bring to awareness those triggers because there's so much for us that is subconscious that we're just not fully across, right? I totally get that. The final part of the puzzle being obviously integration and sharing. For someone that is in a place where they've got that low level of self-confidence, it would be difficult then to fully integrate and share all of that weirdness and uniqueness and all of the good, bad, and the ugly, right? That's why so often we upload photos and we filter them, or we just don't upload them in the first place. So from your perspective, what are some things that we can do to build a higher level of self-confidence and a higher level of self-esteem that's going to not just be temporary in the moment, but something that's going to be enduring? What have you found in your work as a transformational coach that becomes an enduring way to build that confidence?
That's a great question that I think we all will work with, I think, until the day we die. And I think the first thing to accept it and to really gain an awareness of is that it will ebb and flow. Your confidence rises and falls
Mm.
as life hits us with all of its different ups and downs. So it's not this thing that you're always going to have. And there's probably, and sometimes you're going to be like, wow, I have so much of it. It feels so great. So I think that's like a nice base principle.
Yeah.
I think from there, I think one of the things that I've found is that we all struggle with some negative self-talk.
Yep.
And so from that place and in a coaching place, I really believe that the words that we use are really a reflection of our reality. And so if I have negative self-talk driving my entire day, I'm probably going to be pretty down on myself.
Yeah.
And so what we need to do, and some of the coaching work that I do is really, okay, we need to think about you, like, and envision you in a healthier place first, right? And so what would that look like? What would you be able to accomplish? What would that mean to you to have this person like exist in the world? And if we can start to dream who that is, then we can come back and start to say, okay, well, like, let's start to create some self-belief in you, right? And honestly, like, basic three interesting words are like, you're enough. I'm enough is an easy place to start. because I think we really struggle with that in our society today, especially with social media, especially with all the like competitive stuff out there. And like one of the exercises I do and I ask people to do is that you have to look yourself in the mirror and you're going to look yourself in the eyes and either like and tell yourself that either I'm enough, I love you just the way you are, whatever works for you, but we need to create new language in your mind
Mm.
that starts to counteract all the other voices that are like you suck, you're not good enough, blah, blah, blah. And so if we can start to spark your own engine and spark your own fire of self-belief with
Mm.
just a few words, then you have now a new foundation so that you can start to build confidence
Mm.
from.
Yeah.
Otherwise, if we're using external validation, you're like, oh, well, Bob told me I'm okay. Oh, like, and my partner's like, oh, yeah, you're great. You may not always believe them because you don't believe it yourself. So you're just working from a very sandy foundation. And so what we need is we need to sit there first and do the awkward, cringy work of I'm enough and I believe it, and then I can go forward.
Yeah, that makes sense. Talk to me about the transitions that people experience in their lives in the working environment, and what are some of the things that people can put in place to better manage that transition? Not just tactically in terms of, hey, I'm moving to a new office and I've now got a new job, but often in that transition, there's often new communication structures, maybe even new teams, and more often than not, new responsibilities. And if I don't feel like I've fully got all my shit together and where I'm at right now, and then I go to another level and it's more of it, how do I manage that overwhelm? And what's some things I can do to reduce that anxiety and allow myself to perform in a new environment that where the rules of what I was doing previously may not work so well in this new dynamic?
Yeah. That's a great question, and it's one where I think in the corporate space we really run up against quite a lot, especially when people are going into promotions, just like new roles, new teams, um, new bosses. And I think one of the big challenges is that we become very comfortable in our way of being. So,
Yes.
like you said, I create this identity called Mac Ling, and I am communicative, strong, passionate, blah, right, right? And then I succeed at my job,
Yeah.
and they see that, and then they give me a new job. And sometimes the person that Mackling was in job one actually is not going to be successful in job two because we haven't really done the reevaluation of like, well, what is
Yeah.
required to be successful in this job?
Mm.
So that first question is like, we need to sit and think anytime we get pushed into a transition space of like, who do I need to be, or like like how do I need to shift, and what would I look like successful in this role?
Mm.
And actually, this role may require me to do more networking. I may need to do more stakeholder management.
Mm.
I need to be a better communicator. Like, okay. And if we can start again with that vision of, okay, me in that, oh wow, I'd be able to like lead my team better. I'd be able to like communicate with my boss more clearly. I'd be able, and I need to do these things. Then we can start to think about, okay, now I have two models and a point A and a point B. And everything that we do in that next 3 months is really around, hey, I'm going to take a small step in this one area. So, me being a better stakeholder manager. Okay, so today, what's one small thing you can do to start improving that area?
Yeah.
For me being a better communicator, what's one small thing I can do? And
Yeah.
it's really that small incremental work that allows us to get to that new place.
Mm.
And from there, we can then start to let go of the old identity that made us successful before.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think that piece is really the most challenging is that I was so successful as that person and I have to say goodbye. And that can be very, very jarring, as you can imagine. You're like, what? Like, I really liked that person.
Yeah.
And I think that's the hardest part.
Yeah, so spot on. Fantastic. For clients that are out there, or potential clients that are out there that are looking to find out more about you, Mac, and potentially bring you on board as a coach or an advisor or a consultant, whether that be to their companies or themselves individually, what's the best next step? Where do they find out more about what you're doing?
Amazing. So if you're looking for personal work, like one-on-one work, go check out macling.com, macling.com. And if you're in the corporate space, I have a number of coaches that I also work with, and we work specifically with businesses. Coachingcollective.net
Yes.
is the website.
Awesome. Fantastic. I love it. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for your time today. And for everyone that's watching and listening at home, please give us a like, a love, a comment, and a review wherever you're watching this or downloading and listening to it. I want to say thank you, Mac, for your time today. I really appreciate it. And until we see you live or online, be bold, have fun, go make an impact in the world, and we'll see you on the wild side. Thanks so much for listening.